U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to increase tariffs on Canada again.
It began with a threat, not a missile, not a sanction, just a sentence. If we do not make a deal with Canada, President Donald Trump said from behind a podium, we are going to put a big tariff on cars. Could be 50 or 100%.
And this is an interesting one. The president saying that he will now put 100% tariff on movies that, as he puts it, are coming into our country that are produced in foreign lands.
Because we do not want their cars. What may have sounded like political theater was, in fact, the start of something far more real, far more dangerous, far more permanent. In early 2025, the United States stood at a crossroads in trade policy, but instead of rebuilding trust with its closest partner, it chose confrontation. And while Americans were still recovering from price spikes and supply chain chaos, the Trump administration delivered its next shockwave. First came the steel tariffs, then aluminum, then a 25% duty on all finished vehicles imported from Canada. The message was unmistakable. Washington was no longer tolerating cross-border integration. It wanted something else, domestic manufacturing built inside American borders, regardless of the cost. But the cost has already arrived, and it is being paid by workers, businesses, consumers, and now the alliance itself. YouTube is not the biggest fan of content like this, but we believe people deserve to hear the truth. If you agree, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us beat the algorithm and keep going. We really appreciate the support. For over half a century, the US and Canada built an unparalleled production machine. It was a North American choreography refined over decades, shaped by treaties like the 1965 Auto Pact, NAFTA, and the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. A piston might start in Quebec, be cast in Ontario, shaped in Detroit, and installed back in Windsor. A single component might cross the border 5 or 6 times before finding its final home in a finished vehicle. This was not inefficiency. This was specialization. Canada focused on heavy castings, tooling, and stamping. The US handled electronics, final assembly, and software. Together, the two nations formed an economic superstructure that fueled Detroit, lifted Ontario, and drove the continent forward. But in 2025, that balance was shattered. With the stroke of a pen and the flash of a press conference, Washington began dismantling the very system that once gave the United States a competitive edge in the global automotive market. The result? A slow and painful unwinding. Since June 2025, Stellantis has reduced production at its Windsor plant, moving to staggered shifts. Ford halted a new investment cycle in Ontario and redirected production of trucks to Fort Wayne, Indiana. General Motors increased capacity in its US plants and quietly began pulling back from Oshawa. The moves were not celebratory. They were survival tactics. Stellantis has reported losses exceeding $5 billion in just 1 quarter due to tariffs.
Stellantis making a big announcement today across the border in Windsor, a $2.8 billion investment in the Windsor and Brampton, Ontario assembly plants.
Ford has estimated similar damage. In private calls, executives admit that the North American production model, once the pride of Detroit, no longer functions under the weight of tariffs. It is not just the automakers, it is the suppliers, the fabricators, the molders, the tool makers. In southern Ontario, dozens of firms that built their entire business model around cross-border auto work have been left stranded. Long-term contracts are gone, some were canceled overnight, and many were not replaced. For Canadian firms, the fear is not just cost, it is uncertainty. American buyers now view Canada not as a trusted supplier, but as a risk. The system is breaking. Even in the United States, alarm bells are ringing. The United Auto Workers has warned that these disruptions are undermining new labor agreements and threatening recently negotiated wage stability. American factories are suffering from inconsistent part flows. In Michigan, executives worry that lost coordination with Canadian partners could delay entire vehicle lines. Some models have already seen launches pushed back. Others may be canceled altogether. Meanwhile, Trump has doubled down. He has publicly floated the idea of a 100% tariff, and while it has not yet materialized, the threat alone has been enough to spook the markets. Capital investments into Canadian operations have frozen. Automotive forecasts are being slashed. Logistics firms have paused certain cross-border freight operations until further notice. And while the White House celebrates onshoring, a quieter reality is taking hold. The jobs are not moving to America. They are vanishing. Companies are pulling back. Some are rerouting operations to Mexico. Others are delaying investment altogether. What was once a single integrated supply chain is splintering into isolated regional operations. The efficiency is gone. And the cost? That burden now sits squarely on the shoulders of consumers. According to a June report from the Center for Automotive Research, American families are now spending an average of $1,300 more per year on cars and appliances. It is not just the tariffs, it is the cascading effect: higher input costs, delayed shipments, more expensive steel, reduced volume. It adds up fast. And that pain is not staying in the United States. In Canada, the response has been swift, but not loud. Canadian buyers are walking away. Dealerships in Ontario and Quebec have seen sales of U.S. brands fall by 30%.
Well, Canadian automakers have asked Prime Minister Mark Carney to repeal zero-emission vehicle mandates, warning that electric vehicle sales in Canada are decreasing.
Some showrooms are shifting inventory to Korean and European models. Others are cutting floor space entirely. Meanwhile, the damage to the Canadian steel industry is becoming undeniable. Over 90% of Canada's steel exports go to the United States. With a 50% tariff in place, nearly 1,000 jobs have already been lost. That number could rise dramatically in the coming weeks. Towns like Sault Ste. Marie are bracing for collapse. One mayor described it as an economic avalanche, and Canada has not retaliated yet. But that may soon change. Prime Minister Mark Carney has set a deadline, July 21st, 2025. If no deal is reached, Canada will impose retaliatory tariffs on key U.S. exports, including auto parts and finished vehicles. If that happens, Detroit stands to lose its second-largest export market. Nearly 1.8 million American-made vehicles are sold in Canada every year. That number could plummet. There is another twist. Carney's government has floated the idea of lifting import restrictions on Chinese-made vehicles. If tariffs are not rolled back, Chinese electric vehicles could flood the Canadian market, offering lower prices and cutting U.S. manufacturers out entirely. American automakers are now trapped. If they raise prices to offset tariffs, they lose customers. If they absorb the costs, they lose margins. If they do nothing, they risk being replaced altogether. And the confusion is not just in the showrooms, it is in the factories. Uncertainty has paralyzed forward planning. Investment decisions have stalled. Supplier contracts are now written with escape clauses. Forecasts have shortened from years to months. And still, Trump escalates. At a press conference in July, Trump declared that Canada should be the 51st state. The comment was brushed off by many as rhetoric. But inside Ottawa, it landed like a bomb. Combined with new threats of tariffs, it was interpreted as a deliberate signal. The U.S. was not looking for compromise. It was demanding submission. That same week, a new dispute emerged. Canada's digital services tax, a 3% levy on tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Meta, took effect on July 1st. Trump responded by halting all trade talks. "We are done talking," he said. "They will feel the consequences." The irony? The tax was passed into law back in 2024. It had been planned since 2019, but Trump saw its implementation as a personal provocation. He immediately ordered retaliatory tariffs on Canadian steel and dairy exports, warning that more could come within days. Inside Canada's finance ministry, officials acknowledged that the tax might be negotiable, but only if Washington returns to the table. So far, there is no sign of that happening, and this is where the strategy becomes clear. Trump is not just fighting over trade. He is fighting over leverage. He is pushing past diplomacy into territory few leaders have dared to tread. He is using unpredictability as a weapon. He is willing to sacrifice long-term trust for short-term political wins. The problem? Once trust is broken, it does not come back. Foreign investment into Canada rose 9% in the past year. Investment into the United States dropped 28%. The trend is now global. Foreign firms are choosing Canada, not just for economic reasons, but because it is seen as more predictable, more stable, more responsible. Even American executives are acknowledging the damage. In private meetings, auto manufacturers have warned Congress that the trade war could erase billions in value and trigger mass layoffs. Retailers are bracing for a third-quarter pricing shock. Analysts fear that demand is collapsing, not because people do not want to buy, but because they do not know what comes next. Trust, once broken, spreads like a virus. Supply chains that once stretched across North America are fracturing. Labor agreements are unraveling, and the very concept of economic integration is being rewritten in real time. And while Washington continues to play hardball, the damage is falling hardest on those least able to afford it. Working families, factory workers, truck drivers, small business owners. These are not people who appear in policy memos, but they are the ones feeling the pain. Because this is not just about cars, or steel, or digital taxes. This is about credibility. An empire cannot survive without it. A trade partnership cannot function without it. And a global economy cannot grow when the largest players are at war with themselves. Canada was never the enemy. It was the ally, the partner, the economic twin that built North America's industrial core. Now, it may be the one left standing. The deadline is July 21st. If the United States does not change course, the relationship may fracture beyond repair. What follows will not be a negotiation. It will be retaliation, realignment, and retreat. And when that moment comes, it will not be announced in a press conference. It will show up in prices, in jobs, in lost investment, and in the slow, quiet erosion of trust.